one of the biggest disruptors to existing partner business processes, and potentially the biggest threat to your underlying business models, regardless of whether you're a managed service provider or a systems integrator or an ISV, right, is a fundamental shift that we've seen in customer buying behavior. Right? The buyer of today is not the buyer of the past, and very few partner organizations have made the required adjustments to the customer acquisition business processes. Right? So collecting customers historically was relatively easy, in hindsight. Right? There was a small marketing organization that drove outbound campaigns, primarily email or telemarketing and events, to intercept, organizations that had a business problem and were looking for a solution. And then they would very, very quickly hand that over to a sales professional who had the majority of that customer's buying journey, to convince them that your organization was the right choice. Right? So heavily anchored in sales, kind of a light investment in marketing. But what we know about today's buyer is that they are spending the majority of their time within that buying journey anonymous and online. Right? So they're typically engaging with sales professionals now somewhere between 50 and candidly 85% of the way through the buying journey. And this has fundamentally disrupted a lot of partners' sales results. Right? So what we see is two different engagement points today. One, we do see prospects doing the majority of their research themselves and then raising their hand after they've identified a short list of 2 or 3 vendors. But what we're also seeing is a number of suspects, not necessarily prospects, who are raising their hand very early in the research cycle, right? And marketing is taking these, they think they're leads, and then they're handing them over to the sales organization, right? So sales has got this strange collection of prospects that are deep down the buying journey, very, very close to making a decision, and then they've got a much higher volume of lower quality leads that candidly aren't going to be qualified. They really belong back into some form of nurture rhythm. So this fundamental shift that we've seen in customer buying behavior has impacted 4 core disciplines within the partner practice. Right? The first is solution design. Now, historically, the majority of partners, at least that we've worked with, have gone to prospects and said, "What do you want?" and we'll build it for you. Right? So it kept the bench empty, kept the utilization rates high. Right? And the prospect who was really, challenged to articulate very clearly exactly what it is that they want. And what we're seeing today in terms of demand, especially in the cloud, is prospects are looking for pre-configured solutions that they can consume relatively quickly that deliver immediate business value. So they have less of an appetite for paying partners to learn about their business, right? And then to build something unique and special for them that needs to be updated over time. Right? So they've given up their uniqueness in return for immediate time to value. And that has had a huge impact on the types of solutions that partners bring to market. Right? The second area of impact, of course, is marketing. I talked earlier about the higher volume of lower value leads that are being generated primarily online. Right? So if you think about marketing in the past being responsible from somewhere from 0 to 15% of the way through the buying journey, most marketing organizations are funded that way. Right? The majority of the customer acquisition expenses were tied to sales. And yet today's marketing professionals are responsible for building a website, creating content and assets that draw people in, educating and nurturing them until they get to the point where they're ready to engage with a sales professional. And then after the sales team has closed the transaction, marketing is now also responsible for the upsell, cross-sell motion, which is primarily a nurture activity as well, right? Third area of impact based on changing buying behavior is, of course, to the sales organization, right? So again, historically, sales professionals had a long period of time to develop a relationship with the prospect, to communicate and convince them that they were the right choice, right? That your organization was the right one to move forward with. Right? Now what they're doing is they're inheriting a highly educated, but not always accurate prospect, and they very, very quickly have to understand what research they've done, how close are they to the decision, and where does your solution set fall in their priority stack. Radically different sales motion than what we've seen in the past, right? And of course, the fourth area, maybe the most important, has to do with services. So again, kind of going back to the old business model, the majority of the service revenue was sort of tied to, tell me what you want, I'll build it for you, right? Or let me react to a problem that you're having in your business. And what we've seen out there is a demand for a very different type of service. One, organizations are tired of paying to develop something that's unique for them. They want to reward partners that are cannibalizing some of those project services as long as it shows up in the form of intellectual property, right? So they're rewarding organizations with industry solution sets, right? But the other key adjustment has to do with optimization services, right? So taking those reactive managed services and then repositioning them as optimization services that are focused on ensuring that the prospect, your customer, actually realizes the value, right, that they expected when they bought the solution in the first place. Right? Increasingly, organizations are making smaller and smaller investments, especially in the cloud, testing a solution set in a department before expanding it. Right? So if those organizations don't realize those benefits quickly, the project doesn't get expanded, and then those future upsell, cross-sell opportunities disappear. Right? So those are the four core impacts that we see on partner organizations that are tied all the way back into changing buying behavior. Right? Adjustments to solution design, adjustments to the marketing organization, adjustments to the sales organization, and then again, maybe most importantly, adjustments to the service organization. Right? So what I would encourage you to do, if you've piqued your curiosity in the video that we've just watched, is take the next step and watch the deep dive webinar, where I will go into another level of discussion about those impacts in those four areas, but also start to provide some insight and some guidance on how your organization can optimize those four core areas to accelerate the development of your cloud practice.